show was that there was a high degree of serious violence perpetrated by Mr. Depp.
A familiar figure from a well-known legal battle might soon return to the witness stand, this time in the high-profile criminal trial of Sean Combs, also known as Diddy. The question on everyone's mind is whether the doctor who once testified for Amber Heard during her defamation trial against Johnny Depp will now be allowed to take the stand for federal prosecutors in their case against the rap mogul. In this exploration, we'll dive into the recent arguments presented by Combs' defense team, who are vehemently opposing her testimony. Welcome to this detailed breakdown, akin to an episode of Sidebar presented by Law and Crime, hosted by Jesse Weber, where we unpack this intriguing legal development. Federal prosecutors are gearing up to call a significant expert witness, Dr. Dawn M. Hughes, to testify in Sean Combs' upcoming criminal trial, slated to begin next month. Combs faces serious charges including racketeering, prostitution, and sex trafficking. However, his defense team is pushing back hard, arguing that Dr. Hughes should not be permitted to testify. For those who might recognize her name, Dr. Hughes gained prominence 3 years ago during the Johnny Depp-Amber Heard defamation trial in Virginia. There, she was called by Heard's legal team to provide expert opinions on Heard's mental health and whether she exhibited signs of being a victim of abuse, central to Depp's claim that Heard had falsely accused him. During that trial, Dr. Hughes shared her conclusions with the jury. She testified that Heard's accounts of intimate partner violence, supported by the records she reviewed, aligned with established patterns in the field. These patterns included physical violence, psychological aggression, sexual violence, coercive, control, and surveillance behaviors, all allegedly perpetrated by Depp. Additionally, she opined that Heard suffered clear psychological and traumatic effects from statements made by Depp through his attorney, exacerbating her trauma. Dr. Hughes diagnosed Heard with post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, a finding that stirred controversy. Following her testimony, a WebMD profile of her reportedly faced a flood of negative comments, some accusing her of bias against men. Whether these reactions stemmed solely from her testimony in that polarizing case remains unclear, but her involvement undeniably left an impression. Now, Dr. Hughes is poised to potentially testify in another blockbuster trial, this time a criminal proceeding without cameras, as New York federal courts do not allow them. Though there won't be live footage, transcripts of her testimony will be available, and media outlets will undoubtedly cover it extensively. Her participation in two of the most significant trials of the past decade, Depp v. Heard and now United States v. Combs, underscores her prominence in legal circles. But the critical question remains, will the court allow her to testify? To set the stage, let's examine what we know about Dr. Hughes's anticipated role in the Combs case. According to a government exhibit titled Disclosure as to Expert Witness Dawn M. Hughes, Ph.D., ABPP, she is a clinical and forensic psychologist renowned for her expertise in sexual abuse, interpersonal violence, victimization, and traumatic stress. The prosecution expects her to offer insights into sexual abuse, victim responses, coercive control, coping strategies, delayed disclosure, and memory issues related to abuse. Specifically, she will likely discuss coercive control as a tactic used by perpetrators to dominate victims across various relationship dynamics. This could involve physical violence, sexual assault, emotional manipulation, financial control, isolation, gaslighting, surveillance, and exploitation of vulnerabilities, tactics that create a pervasive sense of control over the victim. In Combs' case, where he's accused of using force, fraud, or coercion to compel women into commercial sex acts, referred to as freak-offs, and allegedly employing violence, threats, and drugs to ensure compliance, Dr. Hughes's testimony could be pivotal. She might explain why alleged victims remained in contact with Combs, acquiesced to his demands, or delayed reporting, behaviors that could otherwise confuse jurors. By framing these actions as consistent with known patterns of abuse survivors, she could bolster the credibility of the prosecution's 4 currently unidentified victims named in the indictment. However, Combs' defense team has filed a motion, in limine, a pretrial request to exclude or limit evidence, arguing strenuously against her testimony. Their motion asserts that Dr. Hughes seeks to provide opinions on typical behaviors of abusers and victims, without having reviewed any evidence specific to this case. They claim her testimony is designed to echo the prosecution's narrative. and the accounts of its fact witnesses, serving only to suggest that the accuser's typical behavior implies truthfulness. Labeling her testimony as advocacy masquerading as expertise, the defense contends it should be barred entirely. The defense's argument hinges on several legal principles governing expert testimony. Under the federal rules of evidence, an expert's testimony must meet specific criteria. It must help the jury understand evidence or determine facts, be based on sufficient data, stem from reliable methods, and reflect a reliable application of those methods to the case. Combs' team argues that Dr. Hughes fails these tests. First, they assert her testimony won't assist the jury because it covers topics like gaslighting, love bombing, and power dynamics, already within common knowledge. They describe these as pop psychology concepts, familiar to anyone who reads newspapers or uses social media, negating the need for an expert. They also argue that jurors already understand that victims might use drugs or alcohol to cope, or that sexual assaults often go unreported, dismissing her testimony as condescending to the jury's intelligence. Second, the defense contends that Dr. Hughes risks usurping the court's role by offering definitions that conflict with legal standards. For instance, she plans to define sexual assault to include non-contact violations like voyeurism and coercion in a broader sense than the federal sex trafficking statute, which specifies coercion as involving threats or force. The defense highlights examples, like Combs financially supporting girlfriends or giving gifts after arguments, that wouldn't meet the legal definition of coercion, but might under Hughes' broader framework. They argue this could confuse jurors, who must apply the law as instructed by the judge, not an expert. Third, Combs' team alleges that Dr. Hughes' testimony improperly bolsters the accuser's credibility by suggesting their behaviors align with typical abuse victim patterns, like memory lapses or staying in abusive relationships. They claim this is an impermissible use of expert testimony to scaffold witness credibility, citing cases where courts rejected generalized expert opinions that mirror fact witnesses' accounts. They also challenge her speculation about perpetrators' motives, such as acting to satisfy self-centered desires, as unsupported and disfavored by courts. Beyond these points, the defense questions the reliability of Dr. Hughes' methods. They argue her opinions overreach or misrepresent the literature she cites. For example, while she claims sexual abuse is highly underreported, a report she references shows higher reporting rates for assaults in 2023 compared to other violent crimes. Similarly, her definition of coercive control lacks consensus in the cited studies, and her assertions about coping methods or long-lasting trauma symptoms don't align with the research, which suggests PTSD prevalence decreases over time. Moreover, since she hasn't interviewed the alleged victims or analyzed case-specific evidence, her opinions lack a tailored application, rendering them speculative. For instance, she might attribute a victim's drug use to trauma, but the defense notes alternative explanations, like enjoyment, could apply, a distinction she hasn't explored. Finally, under Rule 403, which allows exclusion of evidence, if its probative value is outweighed by risks like prejudice or confusion, Combs argues Dr. Hughes' testimony offers little value while posing significant dangers. With extensive contemporaneous evidence, like videos and text messages, available to the jury, her generalizations add little insight. Yet, her presence as a government witness could unfairly signal the case's merit, and her conflicting definitions might mislead jurors. Allowing her testimony, they warn, would force the defense to call a rebuttal expert, turning the trial into a distracting battle of experts. Speaking of rebuttals, the defense is prepared to counter with Dr. Alexander Sasha Barty, a forensic psychiatrist. Dr. Barty would argue that broad psychological profiles are unreliable due to the varied, individualized nature of trauma responses, undermining Dr. Hughes' generalizations. He'd also critique her expansive view of coercive control as too vague to be meaningful. Whether this expert showdown occurs depends on the judge's ruling, which, as of now, remains pending. In reflecting on this legal tussle, the Depp heard, trial offers context. Dr. Hughes' testimony there was polarizing, yet admissible, suggesting courts may permit her here too, albeit with limits. Her expertise could clarify complex victim behaviors, but the defense raises valid concerns about relevance, reliability, and prejudice. The judge might allow her to testify generally while restricting case-specific opinions or conflicting legal definitions, Whatever the outcome, her potential role in another landmark case highlights her influence and the stakes in high-stakes litigation. Stay tuned as this unfolds, promising more twists in an already gripping saga.